There is no end to matter, there is no end to grace. There is no end to spirit, there is no end to space. And so we walk with hope in hand towards Zion's promised land. Through every trial, through every test, we seek his peace, we find his rest. There is no end to Zion, no end to love's pure call. For those who seek his promise will find it all in all, in all. There is no end to Zion, no end to love's pure call. For those who seek his promise will find it all in all, in all.
Welcome into another Key of David podcast. And I got to tell you, I've been really excited about this one on the calendar. Before we even started the podcast, our guest, who's Quentin, and I'll get to his whole thing. I was able to meet him and get to know him, and I'm super pumped to have him on. I'm joined by Trevor, the Keys, of course, and David, the Lion Douglas. And as you see the name Quentin there, okay, he also goes by Zelph. If you've seen these posts on his Instagram channel, you'll see Zelph. And I want to get into really quick, where does this Zelph come from? And Quentin, again, welcome to the show. But where did you come up with Zelph? And tell us a little bit about your Instagram channel, or whatever you want to call it, whatever you youthful people call it. And give us some background as to why you got into creating LDS content.
Yeah. So Zelph comes from, I think most people know about the story of Zelph, right? Joseph Smith during Zion's camp, they went up on a hill. Joseph's like, hey, give me a shovel. He starts digging. He brings some bones up and he has this vision, right? And in this vision, he's like, hey, this guy here, he was a Lamanite warrior, and he was part of the last battles in the Book of Mormon. So for me, I've always loved Zelph because I love church history stories like that, like these crazy church history stories that are almost like they're surreal, right? So for me, that's where the name came from. I also like The Legend of Zelda, the video game, so it's kind of a play on words, right? The Legend of Zelph. But this all started, this whole making content thing started because I started watching YouTube channels like Ward Radio and The Stick of Joseph. And for me, I was like, hey, I want to be a part of this. I don't know what my niche is going to be. I love Book of Mormon geography. I love these old, weird church history stories. But I wanted to be a part of the content creation on Instagram. So I decided to make one and start posting some, weird stories from church history. And it kind of just started to get traction. I mean, I'm not huge on Instagram. I only have like 1,300 followers, but I've only been doing it for a little bit here. So yeah. Just love church history.
When I met you, you had like one video. You had just barely started. I think I looked at it and it had like 7 followers. So pretty cool to see that you've grown. And I know you are into that esoteric stuff. And I was outside of a group chat. I just got let into a group chat that David Douglas and Trevor Keys is on. And for whatever reason, I didn't get invited until the other day, and I forgave them. But man, you guys are talking about some stuff. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff today. Is that right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about some stuff for sure. So this actually, the topic we're going to go over today is from one of the videos that I did. And from that one video and this one story, kind of went down a rabbit hole. And it turned into a little bit of a conspiracy theory, like what's going on with the Smithsonian. And yeah, so that's what we're going to deep dive into today.
Well, let's go.
I love rabbit holes.
I've heard that before, Trevor. I've heard that before. So we're going to go down the rabbit hole of giants. Okay. So I think you guys have talked about giants before on here. I may be wrong, but
I feel like it's been briefly a couple times with maybe one or two guests.
I think it came up while you guys were talking about like Bigfoot or something. And
yeah.
Giants came up for a little bit, but you guys moved on. And this is not something that I've studied my whole life or something. like I said, I mean, the past maybe 2 months, I've been deep diving into this, and in our group chat, I'm like, guys, we got to do a video on this because the stuff that I'm finding is pretty wild.
This is one of my favorite. And I told you this on the group text, this is one of my favorite subjects to go into. I've nerded out so bad. Like when our family went to Catalina on a cruise last August, and Catalina was a big giant hub. And I was like telling my whole family, there used to be giants here. And everyone was like,
okay, Trevor.
Nobody
cares. Are you the crazy uncle in your family?
Yeah, apparently.
You know, yeah, that's what I'm turning into as well. But. All right, well, let's do it. So, before we start off, there's kind of two things I want to do a disclaimer on. So, the first one's Book of Mormon geography. Okay, like I said, I'm a big Heartland guy. I have a lot of friends who are Meso guys. I love my Meso brothers and sisters in the church. I will say recently from watching your videos with Lance Weaver, like his continental model, I think is what he calls it. He started to convince me, I think, a little bit. So I'm either Heartland, but I'm willing to expand that out because no matter what model you adopt, it doesn't really matter when we're talking about this subject because there were Nephites, Lamanites, Jaredites, all up and down the Western Hemisphere, Mulekites, right? All up and down the Western Hemisphere. You can go to South America in Peru and Chile, and you're going to get these oral traditions that will match up with Native Americans by the Great Lakes. Like it's pretty wild how these stories and these cultures are connected. So just because a story was said here or there, I'm not making any geographical claims, right? So we just need to broaden our minds a little bit, understand that Book of Mormon people, they were everywhere. They're here for thousands of years. We don't think they were walking up and down this land. There's no way. So that's the first thing. The second one is I got to give a shout out to this book, Giants on Record, America's Hidden History, Secrets and Mounds, and the Smithsonian Files. So it's by Jim, Vera, and Hugh Newman. They're not LDS, okay? But I was reading this book, and the oral history that they gathered from this book is wild. I was like, holy crap, the Book of Mormon is in this book through the oral history of the Native Americans. So wow. A lot of what I've included in the slideshow is from that book. So I got to give it a shout out. I have no relation to these people or this book other than that it's really awesome. So I recommend reading it if this is a subject that you like. But those are the two disclaimers, so we'll go ahead and get started. First off, when it comes to giants, another disclaimer, actually, I'm going to add one. When we think of giants, like in the Old Testament, we think of like these massive 20 feet tall people, that were stomping around. That's not really the kind of giants that we're talking about. We're talking about like 7 to maybe 10 feet.
Like Goliath type size?
Like Goliath, yeah. So like we have these anomalies, like people exist today where they're that tall, right? Because they have some genetic condition or something. But when we're talking about giants, we're talking about just very, very large people. Not necessarily, you're standing next to them and you go up to their kneecap or something. Not that big. But you'd be surprised at how tall a 9-foot person looks. And I actually have a picture of one, and we'll get there. But there's kind of two groups of giants that we're going to talk about today. And the oral history of the natives will either talk about the giants being wiped out by a great calamity sent from God, or they killed each other off. Those are the two oral histories that we get from the Native Americans. So one actually explicitly mentions a flood wiping out the giants. And this is from the Native Americans, right? So we'll make sure that as we go through, we're identifying which group we're talking about because they're different, right? So here are some scriptural references. You guys who are watching the video, you can press pause. You can read these if you want to. But essentially, we know that there were giants in the time of Noah. Noah was commanded to build an ark. from apocryphal sources, we know that the giants were very evil. They were bad. So they weren't allowed to survive the flood, or were they? We'll see. And then in the Book of Mormon, it's kind of interesting, but the Book of Mormon is much more subtle. When they're talking about the Jaredites, and we're talking about Jaredite giants, it's very subtle. So in Ether, it talks about how the brother of Jared was a large and a mighty man. In Messiah, when they find the breastplate and they bring it back to the king, and they're like, look at this thing, they note that it's unusually large. It's really big. Yeah.
Is this a new idea that the Jaredites may have been these large humans?
It's not talked about very often, but it's always been a little bit of a theory in the church. But when we get to the church history story, a letter that I found that actually explicitly identifies a pair of giants or 12 skeletons that were very large as Jaredites.
I feel like it's kind of new. I feel like it's new among Heartlanders. Like Wayne May has been talking about it, and I feel like the fact that there are giant skeletons or remains in some of these burial mounds also is another aspect of it.
There's also some records and writings, first and second hand, where they talked about the reason why Joseph didn't use the breastplate to translate is because it didn't fit him at all. Like, it dwarfed him.
Yeah. So like on my slide, there's actually a quote about that right there. So it says, concerning the spectacles or the Urim and Thummim, I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, some 19th century reports say that the lenses of the interpreters were set too wide for Joseph's eyes, making it uncomfortable for him to use them simultaneously while they rested on the rod. Joseph's father, aware of the spectacles himself, reportedly said that the interpreters were set 1.5 inches wider than the lenses of ordinary spectacles, indicating either that Joseph was not using it the way it was intended by the inventor, or that the device holding the interpreters was designed for a person of extraordinary size. So that's from Don Bradley's book. Shout out to The Lost 116 Pages. Great book. There's also another account from William Smith that talks about how it was meant for a much larger person.
I found one that I've been trying to locate again, where it said that Hiram tried it on as well, and it was, dwarfed Hiram. And they were big boys. These for their time, these were pretty big boys.
And we might have all seen the picture where like there's a thing extended out from the breastplate, and he's looking at him far away from himself. That's how he had to use them. If he brought them up close, they were like over here, right? But if you go back, you can look through them a little bit easier. So, yeah. So needless to say, it's very subtle in the Book of Mormon church history, but it's there. It's there a little bit. Cool. So, but on the subject of Noah, if all the giants were wiped out, how do we get giants after the flood? So in Genesis, it talks about who was allowed on the ark. But essentially, it's Noah's family, and that's it. And that's what we grow up learning, right? It was only Noah's family. But in Deuteronomy 3:11, it talks about a guy named Og. He was the king of Bashan, and he remained of the remnant of giants. So I was thinking, like, who's this Og guy? So I started researching more. There's a ton of apocryphal stuff on him. Even in the Talmud.
The OG.
The OG,
gangster. Og.
The OG, yeah. So Og, here's like a funny picture, because he's actually made it into Jewish like fairy tales. It's kind of interesting. But the more serious writings of Og from the Talmud talks about how he actually was the only other survivor outside of Noah's family that he actually helped build the ark. He helped Noah build the ark. So people are like, how did Noah do this? It's because he had a giant helping him out, right? And he's like, hey, man, let me on the boat. And Noah was pretty much like, sorry, bro, can't let you on. But he held on tight to the side as soon as the floods started rising. And Noah had mercy on him Og said, "Hey, I will serve you and your family for the rest of my life if you let me on this." So Noah, the tradition is that Noah let him on, and he was able to survive.
I thought he was like stowaway. That's how
he was holding on to the mast. And this is, it's not in Jewish folklore. This is in their midrash, which they consider scripture.
Yeah. So there's like, what I found though is researching this, there's a few different accounts and some of them are conflicting, but they all agree that the guy survived. And I think that's probably the most important part of the account here is like, okay, that's how we have Goliath, right? That's how we have the brother Jared. Og.
Is that how we have? Is that how we have Yao Ming and LeBron James?
Probably.
They hail from Og.
Shaq will get a shout out later in this video as well. But yeah, needless to say, it's pretty cool. We actually have someone else besides Noah's family that survived. He was a giant. This is an interesting oral account that was written down by Buffalo Bill. So Buffalo Bill, he was a famous hunter, scout, and guide. I think everyone knows the name Buffalo Bill, but they don't really know who he is. But he was very respected, well-known. And he often spent time with Native Americans while he was out scouting and hunting. And was actually well-known among Native Americans and respected. But he actually wrote down this account right here from an encounter they had with Native Americans. Does anyone want to read that? I don't want to hear my voice too much, so it's a big whoa.
Just go ahead and read it, Quentin.
Okay. So while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara County, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp one night some very large bones, one of which was a surgeon of the expedition, pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indian claimed that the bones they had found were those of a person belonging to a race of people who a long time ago lived in this country. There was once a race of men on the earth whose size was about 3 times that of an ordinary man. And they were so swift and powerful that they could run alongside a buffalo, taking the animal in one arm, could tear the leg and eat the meat as they walked. So these giants denied the existence. Yeah, pretty wild. These giants denied the existence of a great spirit, and when they heard the thunder or saw the lightning, they laughed at it and said that they were greater than either. This displeased the great spirit, and he caused a great rainstorm to come, and the water kept rising higher and higher, so that it drove those proud and conceited giants from the low grounds to the hills, and thence to the mountains. But at last, even the mountaintops were submerged, and then those mammoth men were all drowned. After the flood had subsided, the Great Spirit came to the conclusion that he had made man too large and powerful, and that he would therefore correct the mistake by creating a race of men of smaller size and less strength. And I can end it there. But he notes that, this is just, according to the Native Americans, this is their history. It's not just a legend. Like, they teach this as history. So there we have
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Like, this would then conclude that even God or the Creator can look at things and go, I kind of didn't think that one all the way through. Let's make a little changer upper here, and let's do it a little different. I mean, that's essentially what is in the Native American history. I'm not saying that that's the way that it is, but that's what their tradition was. That God even can change things up, change his mind a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would say, that's what we read of in the Old Testament. Like, he allowed these giants to be, and he said, this has gotten out of hand, right? And they need to go. So I don't know. I can't put the interpretation in there. A lot of these oral traditions, right? We have to find the common thread through them and take that piece and kind of let some of these other things fall off, right? Like, they were 3 times larger. They probably weren't 3 times larger, but the idea was that there were these powerful people and, they had to go. So, yeah. And then also this guy here, I'm not even going to try to say his whole name, so I'll just call him Fernando because I can say Fernando. He was a very famous historian for New Spain. New Spain was pretty much Guatemala all the way up to the western United States. And he studied the Aztec language and was fluent in Spanish. And he would take some of these Aztec records and stuff, and he was studying them. And he said, in this land called New Spain had giants, as it had been shown by the bones that had been discovered in many areas. They were destroyed, and their civilizations came to an end as a result of the great calamities, as punishment from heaven for the serious sins that they had committed. So,
whoa,
again,
sounds like the Bible.
Sounds like the Bible, right? Like, what are these biblical stories doing with Native Americans, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll probably get the skeptics who are like, oh, well, the Native Americans heard, these stories and they adopted them into their culture. That doesn't happen in the matter of a few years, right? Like, that takes a long time. These people had these traditions separate from the white man, right? And I think that we do a great disservice to Native Americans. We don't listen to them. They tell us their history, and we kind of poo-poo it away, right?
Yeah,
but
you're primitive. You're too primitive to know.
Yeah, and that type of thinking actually it is a big reason why we don't have. Well, we'll get to that. I don't want to jump ahead of myself.
Before you jump slides, go back really quick.
Sure.
Find it very interesting. This is exactly what I wear to go to bed. It's a different color, but exactly.
When you came over to my house the other night,
especially in the summer,
when I called you over, I'm like, hey, can you bring me those cookies that you make? And that's how you showed up. So he's not kidding around.
He's after.
Am I having deja vu? I think I must be having deja vu. You guys literally said the same thing in the last video we talked about Fernando.
Trevor, if anyone can bring it back, man, it's going to be you. It's going to be you. So, all right, awesome. So, there and back again, A Giant's Tale. The giants, they left the New World, they went to the Old World, but they did come back again. So, before we jump into that, there's actually one more. I'm not going to read quotes this whole time, I promise you, but these are just really cool. This guy right here, he is not a Latter-day Saint. He's a Catholic priest. He lived between 1645 and 1700, and he wrote down essentially the things, his conclusions that he came to from studying the Aztec and the Toltec documents that he was given in Mexico. He said, arriving at the curiously definite results that the original settlers who descended from Naphtuhim, son of Mizraim and grandson of Noah, who left Egypt for Mexico shortly after the confusion of the tongues.
No way.
And Naphtuhim is the plural form of Nephet, which means honeycomb, or the honeycomb people, or the beekeepers. And in Ether 2:3, what do we read about the Jaredites bringing on their barges? Whole bunch of bees, right? This is a Catholic guy, right? This isn't Joseph Smith going in a time capsule, growing a sweet little mustache and throwing on some glasses and making up history. This stuff predates Joseph Smith, okay?
Wow.
Now, a skeptic could say that he lifted this, but the amount of stuff that Joseph Smith would have had to lift from obscure sources is impossible. It's just not.
By the way, he didn't have the internet. He didn't have ChatGPT. He didn't have any of the, he would have had to have gone to all these libraries and dug up this information. And what are the chances that it would even exist in the libraries that he was around?
I know. Yeah, I see people all the time that are like, this book was only 41 miles away from Joseph Smith at this time. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, this guy has time to go scour libraries, and how does he even know which book to find? And it's like, okay, maybe that one book that mentions that one thing, but what about the other book that mentions this and this and this scattered all over? It's just not possible. I'm sorry. It goes against the anti-Mormon TikTok. It's like video being like, look at this one line is exactly the same from this one thing. And it's like, dude, boy didn't have time. But he was farming. He was looking for treasures. He was
looking for.
He was busy.
He was a busy boy. Okay, too busy to be scouring the nearby libraries all day, every day. So, but yeah, I thought that was an interesting correlation.
That's a cool quote.
Yeah. So now this is where we get to the explicit mention of giants, and I'll try and do this because it's not going to work on my slideshow, and I want the audio to work.
And Quentin, if people want to find you on Instagram while you're looking that up, how can they search you up? How can they find you? Okay, there it is.
There it is. Yep.
And are you only on Instagram, or are you on the TikTok?
I am just on Instagram. I don't do the TikTok.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'm too old. I'm 30, so it's like illegal for me to do the TikTok.
Gotcha.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Tell us which one.
David, this is you. They're right there at the skull. So you can yep.
Recorded in her journal the following experience from her days in Nauvoo. She wrote, "One day in about 1844, the pigs were feeding in the wood and rooted up an evidently ancient mound, unearthing some bones, which father discovered was a human skeleton of immense proportions. Among the bones was a huge skull. He drove the pigs out of that field and brought the skull to the house to show the family. He held it up over his own face. It was so large, it frightened Mother and us children terribly. He took it and went back, and in excavating further, he found 12 giant bodies buried in the form of a wheel, with heads to the center, forming the hub. They were between 7 and 8 feet tall. While he was thus engaged, the prophet Joseph Smith stopped by on horseback. Inquiring what father was about, he soon discovered the size of the skeletons and remarked, 'Jacob, those were Jaredites. Cover them up and let them rest. Fence them in, so nothing can disturb them further.' Father did this, sacredly performing the request, and protected them from further harm."
Nice girl.
That's way cool.
Elizabeth Baum, who is that?
So she was just a member of the church. They lived right outside of Nauvoo. They had some farmland there. So her and her dad, her whole family, they were all members of the church. Jacob Baum had found these skeletons, and then Joseph Smith got word of it in town. So he came by and he's like, "Hey man, these are Jaredites. You got to cover them up and let them rest." But the key is that the skull was massive, right? Like these were huge people. So some of the Jaredites were big. I don't think all the Jaredites were big, but I think that there was a lot of families that came over with the Jaredites, or that are encompassed under the Jaredites, and I think some of them probably were large in size. So I'll go ahead and do I need to reshare my screen?
Yeah,
you do. I was just going to say 8 barges is a lot for just one family.
Yeah.
So some say it was more than 8 barges.
Very possible. Yeah.
And interesting that they're laying in that circle together, heads first. That's
there are 12 of them too.
Yeah, 12.
Right? Shane, you're the number guy. Like 12 is important, right?
Sure is. 12 disciples, 12 apostles.
Yeah, important. So speaking of that, while we're on the topic of, is Joseph Smith making up stuff? Is he collaborating with other members of the church to alter the historical record? Well, according to the Smithsonian, there we go. According to the Smithsonian, this is not the only time they have found something like this. So I don't put a lot of trust in the Smithsonian. Unfortunately for them, they have let a few things slip through the cracks. This being one of them. This was found in the American Ethnology to the Secretary of the Smithsonian. These are books. There's like 20 of them for this period, so there's a lot of stuff in there. But during this dig of it says it's with an F here, but it's actually Keeter Mound in Ohio. They found 12 skeletons. They were arranged in a circle, and their heads were toward the center of the mound, which was occupied by a fireplace. So, crazy.
This says
right?
late 1800s?
Yeah, this was found in the late 1800s.
Okay.
Things start to get a little funky with the Smithsonian around 1904. And we'll talk about that a little bit if we have time. But yeah, so 12 skeletons in a circle, just like Joseph Smith found in Nauvoo. Those are 2 witnesses, but what about a third? So the I don't know if it's Aleutian or Aleutian. Probably Aleutian.
Aleutian Islands, yeah.
Okay, Aleutian Islands, yeah. So the Aleutian Islands, they found this giant mound there, and in this mound, this is a small excerpt at the top here, but it talks about how they found a giant, at least 7 feet tall, and the bodies were arranged in a geometric pattern like the spokes of a wheel. So this was in a newspaper. Wow. That was in Alaska.
What in the heck are people doing living in Alaska?
I know, right? So it's weird, right? Like Nauvoo, Ohio, and then Alaska.
Yeah.
We're finding the same pattern. So when I talk about they covered the face of the land, they covered the face of the land.
Well, we know that's where the Bering Straits, supposedly land bridge was, right? It was up through Alaska, so.
Yep. So I'll try to summarize this because I don't want to just read it you guys the whole time. But this is another group of people that found a bunch of stuff on the Aleutian Islands, and they found a ton of artifacts and a lot of giant bodies and stuff. And this guy is talking about it, Ivan T. Sanderson. He's a well-known zoologist. He was on Johnny Carson's show. But he wrote down that supposedly the Smithsonian came and took all of it, and there's no record of it. The Smithsonian pretty much buried it. And his conclusion is it that these people cannot face rewriting all the textbooks? Essentially, is there a narrative that's trying to be preserved here? Like, this is an amazing find. I know someone personally who was there, is what he's saying. And it's being completely quashed and buried. So, pretty interesting. But there we go. There's a third one of people being buried in a circle.
I don't want to jump the gun, so we're going to talk about the Smithsonian later because I got some stuff there.
We're going there right now.
Okay, cool.
Right now. Yeah, I'm going to rely on you a little bit to jump in and really drive it home. But this picture here is a really famous picture. You've probably seen it before if you've looked into giants at all. It's the San Diego giant. It was discovered in 1895 in a cave by a bunch of prospectors. That's typically how these things are found. They're found by a bunch of working class people who are mining or looking for, in this case, they're looking for guano, which is bat poop. And they found this mummy. And someone from the Smithsonian came, Professor Thomas Wilson, and he examined it with other scientists. And they were like, this is a person, right? This is an actual person. They authenticated it. It was 9 feet tall. So he's kind of up on a platform so you can see, like, he's not that tall, but even if you brought him down where the feet are matching, like, the dude is big. The dude is really big. So we're going to come back to that. But there's this guy named Ales Herdlicka. I'm a bunch of tough names today. We're going to call him Ales. But he was the first curator of the physical anthropology of the U.S. National Museum in 1904, which is the Smithsonian. So he became like the first like overall director of the Smithsonian. And the dude was a big racist. David, I don't think you'd be friends with this guy. I just have a feeling that you
probably would have pretty good jokes, though.
Well, he was a huge proponent of the Bering Land Bridge theory, which it is true. People did come over the Bering Land Bridge, but that was the only way. No boats, according to this guy. And then he was a really big part of the eugenics movement. So this is a pre-Nazi philosophy that was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, that there were superior races and that the Native Americans, there's no way that they could do anything sophisticated. So that is this guy's paradigm. He had a deep disdain for Native Americans. He would fire and he would ruin the careers of anyone who suggested that they were advanced in any way at all. He refused to accept that the Native Americans were smart in any way. Diffusionism
creates this kind of racism. Even today, when we don't listen to natives or the stories, it's just like another form of racism. And it's just crazy.
It's all manifest destiny, right? Like that's why everything that was found in the 1800s was immediately called a hoax. The people who were running the Smithsonian, even before Alice, they were manifest destiny people. They did not believe that the Native Americans could do anything other than make teepees, and it was very racist. So this guy held that same view. So under his direction, though, so it was that giant that we just looked at was discovered in 1895. It was in 1900. It was 13 years later. So you can do the math. He wanted to buy that giant. He paid $15,000 in today's money for the giant. And as soon as he got it, he declared it as a hoax and pretty much destroyed the thing.
Of course he did.
Yeah. So mainly because this was one of the most well-recorded. There's a picture of it, right? He did not like that floating around. So, and then the last thing on Smithsonian, and then Trevor, I'll let you jump in. There was a guy, he's an author named David Hatcher Childress, and he published an article called Smithsonian Gate, where he talked to a lot of people who were like former directors at the Smithsonian. And he wrote, in a private conversation with a well-known historical researcher who shall remain nameless, one was told that a former employee of the Smithsonian who was dismissed for defending the view of diffusionism in the Americas. That's the heresy that other ancient civilizations may have visited the shores of North and South America during many millennia before Columbus. Alleged that the Smithsonian at one time had actually taken a barge full of unusual artifacts out into the Atlantic and dumped them in the ocean. So, and this alone, right, it's not convincing. Like some guy told some guy that the Smithsonian did this. But when you look at and I'm not kidding you, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles talking about how they found giant bones, or they found not even giant bones, just artifacts made of metal and stuff. They said they sent it off in the news articles as we sent it off to the Smithsonian, and no one knows what happened to it. So,
I did a video all about this, and I may want to just repost that video from my Ancient Answers account and just post it on Zion Media. It's an hour-long video of debunking the Smithsonian on their statement. That might be something that viewers may really enjoy.
Yeah, I think so. Because like sometimes we as members, we kind of adopt the narrative of our oppressors a little bit, right? And we start arguing from authority, like, well, this scientist at the Smithsonian said that the Book of Mormon couldn't have happened in North America, or, and we use that against each other. And it's really weird. It's like, why do we put trust in these institutions that have a narrative and they're totally unwilling to go against that narrative? So just something to think about.
Well, in regards to dumping these things in the Atlantic, there's a guy that owns Boneyard, Alaska. I don't know if you guys have watched him on Joe Rogan, but he's got a few acres up in Alaska, and it's in this tundra, this permafrost tundra. And he discovered that it was a washout from one of the floods that there was at one point or another, where all these bones, like huge mammoth bones and saber-toothed tiger, and he literally just has this huge high-pressure hoses that he points them onto his permafrost, and they melt them down. And every single time it melts down, there's more bones and more bones and more bones. He literally has a warehouse that he's built. And if anybody hasn't seen him on Rogan, just go look for Boneyard, Alaska, Joe Rogan. He's been on there twice. He was giving he had an agreement in the 90s to give all of these bones to the Smithsonian. Okay. And he kept sending them up there. And finally, 10 years or so ago, he wanted some of them back. And he started writing the Smithsonian being like, hey, I want my bones back. And he was just getting like, well, we don't know quite where we put them. Long story short, they dumped them in the Hudson River. And he proved it, and they sent out some dive crews, and they actually found them and recovered some of them. And I mean, this is like documented, and he's now asking the Smithsonian, he's like, I want everything back. And they're like, sorry, you've given them to us. The Smithsonian is shady as can be. You know, if you watch Randall Carlson and who is it, Graham Hancock, right? Graham Hancock. They've done a really good job exposing the Smithsonian's prejudice and how they don't want to change their past narrative. And the reason why that is because all of these academics have written articles, peer-reviewed articles on top of it, got funding, grants, and all of this stuff that, you know, like one of these things rips it apart, the whole entire house of cards crumbles, collapses, right? And there was this big manifest destiny thing. And I don't know if are you going more into that, or should I cover manifest destiny just a little bit?
No, go ahead.
So manifest destiny is a 19th century ideology that asserted that the United States had a divine mandate from God to expand its territories across the North American continent. It was coined in 1845, and we used it as justification for our westward expansion. We used it for the reason why we killed all the natives and rounded them up, because God gave us this land as a destiny. And, so anything that would prove, like you said earlier, Quentin, that these natives were sophisticated, that there was pre-travel through boats, besides just the idiots walking across the Bering Straits, that there were, sophisticated civilizations, anything, languages, David, the Bat Creek Stone, right? Any of this stuff that they found, they had to discredit it. They had to bury it. They had to suppress it. And, I say shame on the Smithsonian. And, I don't know if we'll ever get to the bottom of it. I don't know if it's possible.
What's their purpose?
Nothing shall be withheld.
Because like for me, this is all new. Like I always saw, I'm that guy that's like, oh, the Smithsonian, they're this amazing group. Like this is the first time I'm hearing stuff like this. What's their motive? Like, why are they doing this? Why would they cover these things up?
So I got to chime in on this. Just the thing about the Smithsonian is, like, nowadays people would say that it, like you said, Trevor, it's going to take their whole house of cards down. And to be frank, and I'm just going to touch on Mesoamericans, there's a whole economy around that because of donation. Mesoamericans don't like some of the ideas of Heartlanders, and I think a big part of it is because there's been enough money injected into that space that if they start considering the Heartland model, then it really does, in fact, or affect some of the livelihoods of some of those people. So
very similar. Yeah, it's a good point.
Exactly. Very good point. So today, the Smithsonian's got a lot of livelihoods associated with it. So if you start accepting it, you also start having to explain how old the Earth actually is. You have to start to explain evolution and the so-called billions of years that this world has been around. And it starts to become harder and harder to keep that narrative up if you acknowledge, that, hey, the natives can be associated with the Jews. It's fascinating and phenomenal that Jews being related to Native Americans also help to knock down this whole house of cards.
Yeah, they're too far down the river, honestly. I mean, it's too late for them to really accept this without destroying the entire foundation that their organization is built upon.
And it goes all the way to, I don't even know who the president was in 1845. I'm feeling like it was Madison. but the whole entire ideology of America with this westward expansion, where we were pushing west post Louisiana Purchase, right? We had to commit genocide on the Indians. We had to completely displace them. And we had to kick them out of their lands. We rounded them up. We moved them places. And as we kept moving further west through this manifest destiny, because this is what we believed. And Shane, this is to answer your question. This is exactly what it was. It was manifest destiny. It was that the United States was preordained to have this land from God, and we couldn't accept that there was a civilization here that was anything but primitive. No writing, no language. That would ruin the whole entire thesis. So anything that came up, any of these artifacts that had, Jewish writings or Christian symbology or these giants, anything that would, creep up that, like, wow, this could be a sophisticated ancient civilization that didn't just creep across the Bering Straits, but maybe came here in boats. All of that stuff was buried, completely buried. It can't come out.
And it's possible that there is another addition to this answer for you, is that around that time, I don't know, how old is Charles Darwin? When did he became or be coined as an expert? Because
40s and 50s.
Right after the Restoration.
Yeah, so you've got manifest destiny. It's probably affecting people to see that all these displaced Indians are being, removed or deleted from history. And so you have to come up with some explanation. You've got a guy like Charles Darwin, who's definitely not a Christian, coming up with this idea of us coming from, monkeys at some point, evolving. And the more you can dehumanize a group of people, saying that they're primitive, the more you can move on with maybe this manifest destiny, coming up with all sorts of theories.
And that was the religious movement of the time too, is like, these people are savages and we need to control their lives so they won't be savages anymore. Yeah. And that was...
Do you remember what the full title of his book was?
What?
Everybody just always goes to right here. On the origin of species by means of natural selection. They always end there, but it's right here. Or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. This is the racist book ever written. When, like you mentioned, the eugenic
first book of racism.
Eugenic plugged right on top of that. And yeah.
And it's important for people to know, these were the people running our scientific institutions through the entire 1800s and 1900s.
Yeah.
And we rely on these people to tell us the story of Native Americans, and we ignore the Native Americans to tell us their own story.
Right.
So that's just something to think about. Now, going on here, because I want to finish this up, because I know we have to wrap up soon.
We're good. We got 20 minutes. We got 20 minutes.
Okay, cool. So we have, these are all newspaper clippings. These are a tiny, tiny sample of all the newspaper clippings that are out there. This one here is actually a Smithsonian dig record that talks about how they found a skull that was very large. So like I said, some of the Smithsonian, some of these things have slipped through the cracks a little bit, but every single one of these articles talks about how they handed over the findings over to the Smithsonian. And if you go to the Smithsonian and ask them where these things are, they will shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know.
Yeah, it's in the basement somewhere. It's fun. Everybody who's doing this, go to YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and search newspaper. Oh, hi, Trevor. Search newspaper articles, giants. And there's hundreds and hundreds. There's one, we live in Utah here, High Ogden Standard Examiner. There's one from the Ogden Standard Examiner, where I grew up, my hometown paper, that talks about the Catalina giants. So,
and every once in a while, Trevor, we will find that things pop up that even the scientific community is forced to acknowledge. And we're going to jump into that right now, actually. So, the Lovelock Cave in Nevada. So, Trevor, I'm sure you know this one.
This is such a cool story, man. This is such a cool story.
This one's amazing. Okay, so again, like I had mentioned before, usually this stuff is discovered by lay people, right? So this was a bunch of miners. They go into this cave in 1911, and one of them wrote that they found skeletons, and that some of them were 7 feet 7 inches tall, and that there were 60. They counted 60 of them in there. And this kind of got out, and then I don't know what happened in between, but eventually they actually do an archaeological dig in there. They don't find any remains at all, but they find thousands of artifacts, which is really curious. And what they found, and this is acknowledged by the scientific community, the New York Post, you can jump on their the article that they have on it, and they'll tell you as well. They found a bunch of sandals that are size 29. So for reference, Shaq is 7'1", and he's a size 22. So they found size 29 sandals in this cave. If you see the picture below the sandals where that guy's holding a big knife, you can see his hand. You can see that kind of black print on the rock. That's a hand. That is a hand, 2 times the size of a normal human hand. And then in this article, they actually reference the legends of these people. So I think it's the Paiute Indians. They have a legend of a race called the Siteka. They were a bunch of giants, and they had red hair and fair skin. And essentially they were terrorizing all the other Native Americans. So the Native Americans got into them like...
They were eating them.
They were eating them. They were cannibals. Yeah. So the Native Americans were like, okay, we've had enough of you guys. Like, we're banding together and we're getting rid of you, essentially. They chased all of them into this cave, according to legend. And they said they would like yell into the cave, hey, if you guys promise to eat like the regular Native American and stop eating humans, like, we will not kill you. And they would shout back, no. And they would ask him again, no. Then a giant would come out, they'd kill it, they'd give him another warning. Eventually they lit everyone on fire that was inside the cave, is what the legend says.
They burned them out. They burned them out. And Paiutes tell this story, like, this has been passed down really, really clear. Really clear. There's tons of books written on it, like several books.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they found actually some, nope, I don't have it written, but they did find, it's right here. Some years later, an article published in the Nevada Review Minor in 1931 announced the discovery of 2 mummified skeletons in a dry lake bed outside Lovelock. The remains reportedly measured 8.5 to 10 feet, respectively, and were described as having red hair.
Red hair.
What's up with the red hair?
You'll find it. You'll find it in some of these legends that these people had fair skin and they had red hair. So
remember Brewer's Cave here in Utah? The giant had red hair. The traits are, that is Brewer's Cave right there. Picture Brewer's Cave. The legend is red hair, 6 fingers, 6 toes. And in the Bible, it talks about 6 fingers, 6 toes when it meant 3 times.
Yep. And then you also, I didn't include these, but there are Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s that write about people that were still alive, remnants of very large people that were still alive that had 6 fingers on each hand. So,
do you guys remember
more than one?
Do you guys remember the Princess Bride?
Yeah.
The guy wasn't a giant, but you remember the guys with 6 fingers?
Just like that.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, this red hair theme is interesting because in our own Mormon folklore, as I like to call it, we also have a story about giants being found with red hair. So you guys know the legend of Brewer's Cave. You guys had on Terry Carter is his name, right? Mm-hmm. And he talked about how John Brewer, right? He had discovered this cave. He actually made these illustrations here. In this cave, there were two giants with red hair. They had copper or gold armor, I believe, crowns, which is really interesting because
breastplates.
In one of these, I don't know which one. Oh, right here. So it says that they had found in one of the mounds, this is in the eastern United States, they had found a 9'2" skeleton in a mound. It was wearing a copper crown. So
9 feet is massive. Can you imagine the width as well, like the additional width on the person? Ugh.
What would the NBA and NFL be like with 9-footers running around?
Be wild.
Be wild. Yeah. So, I mean, just I don't want to recap information that's already been said on this podcast too much, but just to summarize this, John Brewer was in one of those weird situations where he found something amazing, and he wanted to keep it secret. We know that he tried to get BYU involved, but through misunderstandings and problems, it just never happened. The story is very understandable. He felt like
clearly not the right time.
Yeah, it wasn't the right time. And it's interesting how that seems to be a theme with a lot of these stories. But in that cave, they found metal, copper records, right? They were in stone boxes, which is interesting. John Brewer wasn't even, from what I understand, he wasn't a super active member of the church or anything. So, and that the boxes were covered in this like bark sap type thing.
Very similar, interestingly enough, very similar to how the Nemenhah records were found. Very, very similar. He said that they were wrapped in
the sap.
Ooh, very powerful synchronicity there.
And for those of you who don't know, the Nemenhah records are an additional book. We've talked about this on our podcast. If you want to check out the records, you can click whatever link is on our thing. David knows it's like our link tree, and you can take a look at those writings. We have some of them on our YouTube. So if you're seeing this for the first time, check them out. But yeah, it's exactly what he described is exactly what Chief Cloudpiler described.
We just got to scour those records now and see if they mention any giants, because if they do, I'm bought in, fellas. I'm bought in.
There we go.
But no, just kidding. But yeah, so that's very interesting though. But they did radiocarbon date that sap or the bark that was around these records, and they radiocarboned to 5 BC to 390 BC, around there. Which, from what I understand, I haven't really read the Nemenhah records much, but I believe that kind of matches the time and place where they may have been. I don't know. Maybe there was some big people wandering around up there as well. It's my personal belief that there were some large giants that had existed up until probably the 1800s, before they were officially exterminated by other Native Americans. Just because we have so many early records of conquistadors who actually saw them, right? And like went back and like, dude, we saw giant people. A bunch of them wrote it down in their journals. So
and we have all the way to, I think it's 2004. There's an account in Afghanistan. We know about all the Afghanistan caves, right? That the Taliban went and hid in. And have you guys heard the story of the Kandahar giant? No. David says yes. If you haven't heard the story of the Kandahar giant, do yourself a favor, press pause, go open up TikTok or Instagram, YouTube, type in the Kandahar giant, and there were some soldiers who went missing.
Oh, yeah, I do know this one.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, long story short, they have this massive giant that comes out and kills one of the soldiers with this huge 12-foot pole. And then they end up focusing on his head, kill him. Helicopter flies it out, and they said it was between 1,100 and 1,200 pounds.
Okay, I gotta play this. I'm serious. This is crazy.
Is this the Kandahar giant?
Yeah. This is probably
I'm done, so let's do it. Let's dive in.
2002, in the Afghanistan mountains, U.S. Special Forces soldiers discovered something bone-chilling. As they patrolled, they came across a cave with bones strewn across the ground and a stench in the air. A 13-foot-tall giant charged out of the cave and speared Dan, an unfortunate soldier. The soldiers quickly dispatched the red-headed giant. Observing the body, they discovered that it had 6 fingers on each hand and double rows of teeth. A Chinook carried the giant away, and the story of the giant of Kandahar was covered up by the government.
If you look deep enough at this, one of the soldiers that was there does an interview, talks about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's chilling. There wasn't a metal tip on the end of the pole. He wasn't 13 feet. They said it was between 10 and 11 feet, but 1,100 to 1,200 pounds. And they know that because cargo nets have specific weight limits that they can carry. Like those things can carry way more than 1,100, 1,200 pounds, but they had to bring out the right net for this guy.
Yeah, and I didn't bring any of these pictures, but they are in that book that I referenced at the beginning. They have pictures and stuff of skulls with the double rows of teeth.
Double teeth, yes.
Well, very, very, very common that was reported in a lot of these articles. Yeah, I'll send them over. It's in a lot of the articles, they report that there's these double rows of teeth on these giant skulls. So my guess, that's the Nephilim. If I had to guess, these are the pre-flood giants, but yeah.
Amazing. Well, Quentin, that was so cool. I mean, giants are so interesting. I know it's one of Trevor's favorite things, to the Nephilim and giants. And so this was a super fun episode. We're excited to have you back on regularly with us, exploring some of these other topics and interesting things, whether it's Zelph or whether it's finding these skeletons that are 7, 8, 9, 10 feet tall. Really, really interesting stuff. I learned a ton today, so thank you so much for coming on. How can people find you? Is it just mainly Instagram?
Yeah, just Instagram, the Legend of Zelph, with a period in between each word. On Instagram, you can give me a follow. I try to make a lot of content. Latter-day Chad I collab with him a lot, so he's been kind of carrying the load of content lately, but I'm going to jump back on soon and pump out some videos. So.
Nice. Go give him a follow. Go to Instagram. Go check him out. Quentin, thank you so much for taking the time, for preparing the presentation. And thank you all again for tuning in. If you like this video, listen, like it. It helps the algorithm, supposedly. And subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? Zion Media is where it's at. We just did our 100th episode the other day, and we just decided, you know what? We're not just going to do 100. We're going to do 300, 400, maybe 100,000. So anyways, for myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For David the Lion Douglas and Trevor the Key Keys, and our man, the legend of Zelph, Quentin, thank you all, and we'll see you guys next time.
Come together, searching for the way, guided by the Spirit, shining every day. Voices call from Zion, beckoning the pure, gathering the faithful where the truth is sure. Follow the Spirit, follow the light, follow the truth. Don't lose your way, don't lose your way. Follow the Spirit, follow the light, follow the light, follow the truth. It shines today. Gather all the nations, call them to the fold, where Zion's truth and glory brighter than the gold. Seeking for the answers for what we never knew, finding in hands, call them to the fold, with Zion's truth and glory, brighter than the gold. Seeking for the answers,